Welcome back to Backlog Banter. Today we're here for another episode of The Quest for the Bestest. I'm Timo. We got Abram, we got Tanner, we got Tucker. We are talking about this week. Our assigned Best Picture winner to watch was The Godfather Part 2. A miraculous random number generation gave us Godfather Part 1 and then Godfather Part 2.
Card in the corner.
Yep.
Card in the corner.
Back to back. Week
To
after
banter.
week to review. So before we get going, I think we should just have a little recap of what happened last week. We discussed Godfather Part 1.
Last time on.
Yep.
The quest is for the bestest.
We talked about Godfather Part 1. We had interesting, intelligent discussion. And guess where it ended up? Godfather Part 1 ended up at the number 1 spot on our list of 2 movies.
Wow.
I think
Incredible.
one other thing happened last week that we need to address. There's been some pressure to address it, but I figure if we just get it out in the open, it's better. We need to issue an apology to Francis Ford Coppola because Tucker used a still from Godfather Part 2 in the Godfather Part 1 thumbnail.
Yeah, that's true. I've been thinking about re-editing it and making that the Part 2 thumbnail and then making another thumbnail for Part 1. I've been considering it. I don't know if I have the Photoshop document for that thumbnail still.
Sure, but we're gentlemen of integrity here at Backlog Banter, so we wanted to apologize to Mr. Francis Ford Coppola, Mr. Marlon Brando.
I know it's been hanging on him.
Yes,
we especially want to apologize to Mr. Marlon Brando,
Mr. Marlon
James Caan. We're sorry. Al Pacino. We're sincerely sorry.
Robert
for Tucker's
Duvall.
mistake.
Please don't sue me.
Yeah. Should we talk about The Godfather Part 2?
Oh, good idea. Good idea.
It's a movie we watched.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's put this out there first and foremost, okay? What our experiences with this are, and I'm just going to get it out of the way. Tanner and I, this is each of our second time seeing it this year. This year, we saw it twice, and it was our first time seeing it this year, so this is our second time. Whatever, you get it. And then the other two schmuckleheads on the other side had never seen it before, so this is a new experience for them. So it's going to be interesting seeing how our two cultures collide.
I agree.
So I heard that you two, Tucker and Tanner, watched it in 2 parts. Did you split it at the intermission?
Before the intermission.
Yes.
Okay.
Because the intermission's not halfway through.
It's 2 hours through.
Yeah.
I took an intermission break at the intermission, but I watched the whole thing all the way through.
I watched it all the way through. Also, I'm going to be honest, though, I had a 9-course meal starting with fucking chips and some cookies and some mandarin oranges. I had a chicken sandwich in there. I had some shrimp. I had all kinds of shit. So I took some food
oranges.
breaks.
Oranges, you said.
Oranges.
Oh, shit.
Oranges?
I did. I
Okay.
had 4 cups of mandarin oranges.
Since I pointed it out in the first movie, did you guys notice the oranges this time?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I totally know.
Absolutely.
So many oranges. Francis Ford Coppola loves vitamin C.
He doesn't want scurvy.
He loves vitamin
scurvy.
C. And
There's no scurvy on the end of Godfather Part 2.
He might love vitamin C, but I fucking adore The Godfather Part 2.
Oh, okay. We're actually talking about it.
I think we've beaten around the bush quite long enough.
Yeah.
I think we should talk about the actual film. I was floored by it. I had a long day, and I looked at the runtime. I'm like, Jesus Christ, 3.5 hours. I really enjoyed The Godfather Part 1, but I don't know if I have the bandwidth for this right now.
Yeah.
But I sat down, and I was treated to, I think, one of the most magnificent stories I've ever seen unfold in cinema, and I think that experience was strengthened by the fact that I had just watched Godfather Part 1, so I was able to see the way that Ford Coppola was able to play off of his own story beats and his own tropes in the sequel, and I just think it is such a strong and effective and bold film.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably the first one to say any of that. This film doesn't get any love. But, I like The Godfather. I like Godfather Part 2 even more. Let me just put that out there. I prefer Godfather Part 2 over Part 1. And obviously, I guess that kind of clues you into where I want it to go on the list. But I am not as glowing as you are about it. I think it's a very good movie. I do prefer it to Part 1. But as I was watching it my second time through, I started realizing, much like my first experience with Part 1, both of them I gave 4.5 stars on my first watch. Both dropped about a star on a second watch, because watching this through, I realized that while I really appreciate the movie and I respect it a lot, I just do not care. Holy shit, I don't care.
Wow, that's a
Uh,
strong take. I
That
liked
is a
it.
strong take.
I liked it on the whole. I thought it was a fun movie. I felt that it didn't, meet like everyone who looks at that runtime on Amazon Prime as they are clicking the rent button, and you're like, all right, here we go, 3.5 hours. This is a movie. I was a little worried, but I didn't quite feel the length too much. The intermission really helps, but I don't know. For me, it's hard to discuss without giving away my position on it.
Give away your position. Well,
Okay.
that's what this
okay,
discussion.
yeah, that's true. I plan on giving away my position.
All right.
Yeah.
I
So,
plan on putting
I
it all
like-
out there.
I like Godfather Part 1 better, actually.
Ooh,
Because
discourse.
discourse. Wow, this is what it's all about. To me, Godfather Part 1 was just like, I don't know. It felt more like I could understand what was going on a little bit more. I'm having trouble with the words, but it's like Godfather Part 2 was a more complicated story. I think the plot had more characters. They're more interwoven. It had the flashback scenes. I actually really like the flashback scenes. So those are definitely my favorite parts of the movie. I just couldn't quite feel the modern elements so much as I could feel like just all the filmmaking elements working together in Godfather Part 1.
I'm gonna have to side with Timo on this one. I do prefer Godfather to the Godfather Part
shit.
2. For a plethora of reasons. I think that this one just seems to be like pushing the bounds of its runtime more. It's only 20 minutes longer, but it feels longer than that. I, for one, on the rewatch this time, I liked the flashback sequences more, but I had a greater understanding for like what Francis Ford Coppola wanted to say with the parallel timelines. I also actually prefer Pacino's performance in Part 1 to Part 2. I think this one is much more of an awards bait performance. He's much bigger and bodier. But in the first one, I feel like his performance serves more of Michael's arc than it seems like he's trying to win an Oscar.
Sure.
I don't know if I felt that, but what I did feel similar to you guys is how incredible the parallel structure is in the film. And I didn't like it initially. When the film started with the flashback, I was like, I don't know if I'm feeling this. And I still think that I'm a little bit shaky on how the film opens and actually how it closes. But other than that, I think that the way you watch Vito's rise as Michael falls and where Ford Coppola decides to transition between the storylines is so effective. And I think that on a macro level, I actually didn't feel the runtime as much as I did in Godfather Part 1 because I found myself really invested in the way the characters are being portrayed. As you can watch Michael subtly start to really lose his grip and then really, really lose his grip. From the attempt on his life at the beginning of the film, I was in. And I think that it doesn't have the set piece moments. Tucker and I were texting about this a little bit. It doesn't have the set piece moments that Part 1 had. It doesn't have the horse head in the bed. It doesn't have Look How You Massacred My Boy. It doesn't have those things. But what it has instead is, I think, a slower and more deliberate story about these characters in a way that, for me, resonated more. I really loved watching them unfold. And I loved how nuanced the performances from De Niro and Pacino were. I really think they both did an excellent job. So I've got specific scenes I want to point to when we get to certain points.
I'm going to offer my oop. Who's going first?
You go. You can go.
Okay. I'm going to offer my perspective on why I prefer this movie over the first. I talked a lot in the last review about how I prefer the family aspect of the film with the entire family, the Corleone family, and I wasn't as invested in Michael's rise as I was in Vito as a character. I prefer Marlon Brando. I prefer the story of Vito, and this one obviously gives you a lot more of that. You get the origins of it, which I find a lot more interesting than any of the modern stuff. I constantly kept pointing out with Tanner that the set design, the production design of that early 1900s New York street. Oh,
it's staggering.
It is really good. It is
so
really good.
Yeah, and
honestly,
there's
lots of orange stands.
There are a lot of oranges, yeah. And honestly, that set and area and the characters that young Vito interacts with and seeing his story and his rise to becoming trusted by the community, and learning that he can use sort of more nefarious ways but still be a trusting person to get what he wants. I found that really interesting, and I also preferred Michael in this movie. I think that his story of becoming really into the Godfather role, where he sort of ended the first movie and ruining all his relationships with everyone around him to the umpteenth degree of death. But I found that more interesting, and the aspect of him getting pulled into the legal system, I found that a lot more interesting as well. So I think all of those aspects combined to make the characters a lot more engaging to me, and improved over the first one. And also I think the switches between the two timelines allowed me to feel like it was better paced, because I really didn't feel the runtime as much, probably because it was essentially telling two stories.
I want to go back to a point that Abram made about the macro and the micro. For me, in watching Godfather Part 2, I got so caught up in the micro of who the characters were and what they were saying and what that meant, that I missed a lot of the macro stuff, like that transitions. I really don't think I could tell you right now, or I don't remember like when the movie changed scenes, like, and why it did it. Just because I was so wrapped up in trying to figure out, like, okay, now we're in Cuba and we got Hyman Roth and he's doing this, but maybe he wants to kill Michael, but maybe he does. And I was just like, I felt that the story and its convolutedness made it a lot harder for me to like fully appreciate what all these characters are doing. I do get the rise and fall narrative. It's in here. It's in the two separate stories, the rise of Vito and the fall of Michael. But for me, it just feels it feels subtle to almost a too great degree, where I'm not quite catching on like the beats every single time they happen. Whereas in the first movie, I really get the rise of Michael with the simultaneous fall of his morality.
Well, I think for me, I think that's part of the reason why I liked it, because I agree that the plot is fucking convoluted.
It's complicated.
But I think that's to the film's benefit, because I think that part of the nuance to Michael's character that I love is how Pacino is able to portray outwardly the Michael Corleone who's confident and he's the Godfather. But really, he's the Michael that feels that he's not living up to his father, that isn't really in control. He's this character that had his own path and that got fucked up. And now he's in the situation where he is not Vito. He wishes he was Vito, but he can't be. So for me, when I'm like, okay, hold on. So was it Frank or was it Hyman that tried to kill him? Hold on, wait a second. I connected with Michael on that level. I felt like I was in his position, where there's this front being put up of, okay, we're confident, we know what's happening, but actually there are these moving pieces that are difficult to parse out. And for me, that was part of the reason I love the feel of the film. I think it feels really good to watch, even if some of the plot beats are hard to follow. I think they resonate well with the character arcs and with the audiences as a result.
Tanner, you have thoughts?
Okay. Yeah, I just want to go back to the parallel timelines, because it's similar to what we've kind of been talking about. But on my first watch, I did not care for it. I was like, Robert De Niro, you don't really see...
My internet's bad right now, sorry.
Okay.
You're back, by the way.
Hi.
Okay. You don't really see Robert De Niro young Vito setting up the Corleone crime family in the literal sense. And I didn't like that on my first watch. In the second watch, I realized that it's more about how they interact with people, how those people help them set up their family, how those relationships dealt into how they run their business. Vito, he's trusting of people more. He's powerful, but he's not a jerk about it. Whereas Michael, he cuts ties left and right, like his main hobby is burning bridges. And that's how they run their families, and that's what leads to the parallel of the rise and fall of the Corleone crime family.
I will say that watching part 2 definitely got me interested to watch part 3. I'm probably going to watch it, even if we're not going to discuss it or whatever, just because I am invested enough in the story that I care about how it ends.
Yeah, and even as someone who doesn't connect to these movies but still has a great deal of respect for them, I do want to watch part 3. Even though I've heard it's kind of a mess, I'm interested enough, whether that's not as much as anyone else here, but I'm still interested enough to see what part 3 is, and kind of just to say, hey, I've seen the whole Godfather series. But I think that is a sign that part 2 kind of picked me up in terms of my interest in the characters and the world and the family, and I don't know where it goes after this because I haven't heard anything about part 3 except for that it's kind of a mess.
Do you know if they intended to make a part 3 while they were working on part 2, or did they make
Well,
part 2 and then
It's
because
It
based on a
seemed-
book, so I would
It-
bet that they didn't finish the story in
It
part 2.
seems like, though, with the time gap in between, it seems like they didn't intend to make, because this came out in 1974. I think part 3 was 1991 or something like that.
1990, I believe.
Yeah.
wow.
So, well, yeah, what is that, a 15-year gap? It doesn't seem to me like they intended on making a part 3, but
Because
and-
I could excuse away a lot of the convoluted and like the stuff that I didn't quite like as it being like a middle film, because middle films and trilogies often have to do a really much more difficult job of bridging these gaps between the two more like flashy acts. The second act is usually the one that like gets really slow and bogged down in like a traditional story, but when it's in a trilogy, that means your second movie is like that. And so if it's wasn't intended for that, that makes me question some of the things that makes me a little bit more difficult for me to excuse some of the parts that I don't quite like about it.
Yeah.
See, I personally, I will watch part 3, but I'm not in a particular rush to it because for me, it's a story about father and son. And we
Mm.
saw the father and now we see the son. Even if the son seemed to be more central to the first, that was really Vito's film. That was Michael coming into it. And then this is obviously Michael's film. So I think that the way the film ends for me, I would have cut it a little bit shorter. I would have cut it when he's smoking by himself at the table. But one of my favorite sequences that for me really tied together the two halves of the narrative is we had Michael's absolutely chilling murder of the 5 families in part 1.
Mhm.
And now here we have 3 just botched hits, which I think is so clever and really speaks to the fact that this is the other side. This is the decline. It ends with Michael completely removed. He's not smugly participating in a baptism. He's in his home. Everyone's gone, and he just had his brother killed. And we had Hyman Roth run up on an airport, and the shooter got grabbed right away. It's a mess. And for me, being left on that note, I think is really powerful.
Yeah.
I would, Abram, I'm gonna have to disagree with you that The Godfather Part 1 is Vito's film. I very much disagree. I'm gonna side with Al Pacino. Al Pacino should have gotten that Best Actor nomination over Marlon Brando,
Yeah.
just based on screen time, based on the fact that The Godfather Part 1 is Michael's. Even if it's the beginning of his story, it is him making, falling out of the path that he had set for himself and into the crime family. So I very much think that The Godfather is Michael's story with sort of Vito still as that shadow figure. Whereas in this one, I guess it's sort of the same. It's still Michael's film, and Vito is sort of a story that we go back to. He gets obviously a lot less screen time. Robert De Niro does, but yeah, I think both films are Michael's film. It's a trilogy about Michael.
The reason I said that, and to just wrap this up, because I think Timo, you have something you want to hop in with, but for me, everything Michael's character in part 1 is informed by Vito. Vito's hit, being put in the hospital, is what changes Michael's life. Michael actually, as a character, loses a lot of his agency in that film. So for me, that's why I think that is Vito's film. But here, this story is about Michael, and I think the shadowy figure idea fits a lot better here, because looming in the back of Michael's mind, the same way it's looming in the audience's mind, is this parallel narrative about his father rising, as Michael's very much self-aware of his fall. So that's why I draw the father and son parallel.
I see. Okay, fair enough. I can see that.
So I wanted to go in a completely different direction and talk about the satisfaction felt while watching, because as we discuss this rise and fall narrative, which says, people are rising and falling in both movies. I think that in the first movie, we like Michael Corleone so much because he's portrayed to us as a sympathetic character. And so it feels good to see him succeed, to see him rise. We know he's bad, but we're not shown any of it. He's like portrayed sympathetically. We don't see any of the real harm that's caused by his business. And similarly, Godfather Part 2 is told from the same perspective. And yet the fall narrative just doesn't, like, as a viewer, like pretty surface level, I think, just doesn't feel as good to watch this character that I felt good about succeeding in the first movie, despite, you know, everything. See him fall, it just is like, it's a little bit less satisfying.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting if you listen to all you guys talk about all this. But I think that the strength of this movie comes from the fact that you can analyze it from multiple directions. In Abram and I's eyes, the movie's more about the first one more about Michael or Vito. You get to choose, and you really can watch from multiple perspectives and essentially get different stories out of it, which I think is very cool, especially because it does have such a good balance of essentially two lead characters.
I want to jump off of what Tucker said and off of what Timo said in specific and talk about the idea of feel, because to return to something I said earlier, I felt like I resonated with Michael and his confusion. For me, the moment that, the fall feels a little bit strange, but I think it's clarified for the audience at the same time it's clarified for Michael in what I think is one of the most horrifying scenes in either film, which is when Kay says it wasn't a miscarriage, it was an abortion.
That's
And
the most shocking scene in any of the two movies. I would agree. I'd say it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it registers on Michael's face. I think the same time it registers for the audience. He fucked everything up beyond belief, and that it just is what it is. He couldn't see it. He couldn't control it anymore. And for me, that was effective because I felt, like you said, I was like, well, it seems like he's still doing his best. Like he's still trying to be a family man, right? And he's still trying to make these moves, even though he's botching these hits and things aren't going right with Hyman. But then that scene case, like, no, I will not. Michael, it was a boy. And I'm telling you right now, I killed him because I could not have another one of your sons. And that was such a harrowing moment in everyone's arc. And to see Al Pacino portray just that white hot anger, the shot where it cuts to him and his jaw is shaking, is incredible. And for me, that's the sequence that solidified that I didn't have the problem you were having, Timo.
I agree. I think that scene is the best scene in the movie. I think that's like it's at least emotional and intensity, like climax. I don't know if it's the climax of the plot or not, but it's up there in terms of everything coming together.
My personal favorite, we're just going to take us in a entirely different direction, but on the same tangent, is my favorite scene from the film is the one where Vito in the past is killing Don Chichi. He's got that whole plan. He's gone on the roofs. He's set up the plan with his friends earlier. The gears have been turning in his head, and he's got the gun stashed, and he's got it timed to the light bulb being twisted, and the gun in the towel, and then disposing of it and timing it with the music going on outside. And also simultaneously get a really cool set design. And one of the set pieces of the movie is the fact that there's a whole parade going outside, and you've got the shot following the Jesus statue that is covered. The top is covered and the bottom is covered. And I just love everything about that scene. Like, there's not a lot from either of these movies that I really connect to, but that scene just, I absolutely love it.
We got to give special mention to those Veto sequences.
Yeah.
I mean, that is incredible filmmaking. It is incredible. And De Niro's portrayal, I think, is so nuanced. And at first, I wasn't crazy about how he's following Clemenza into the house. He's like, oh, I'm just kind of hanging out.
Yeah.
But as you watch him fit into that role, and then you watch him literally just negotiate rent, he has such an energy about him. And that's communicated so well. And it's just seamless the way that Ford Coppola and the entire studio production, the entire apparatus put together such an amazing compliment to Michael's storyline. That is just such good filmmaking.
I think in De Niro's acting, it's really evident to see how he like took Marlon Brando's performance and like distilled it and de-aged it into this like into his performance, he made it seem like, like I totally bought that he was Vito Corleone, just younger. The way he spoke, the way he acted, the like the tones, the lines, everything was just delivered in like a super convincing way.
I don't want to feel like I don't want to seem like I'm super down on this movie, because I still think this is a very, very good movie. But the way you guys talk about how this movie, the feel of this movie, it just didn't hit that for me. I just thought I felt it was less compelling. I really felt the runtime during this watch, especially during this watch through, even though we did have the break in the middle. I don't know. I don't know what it is about The Godfather Part 2, but it's just an inferior film to The Godfather for me. I think it's Al Pacino's performance. I think it is the set pieces. I think it is the cog in the machinery of the family working together and the grander scheme of all the crime families. I feel like that story is more concise. Concise, and The Godfather is, they don't seem like they should work together, but it's more concise in
Comparatively.
comparison,
Yeah.
to The Godfather Part 2. Like we said, the story is convoluted. I think a point to that fact is that we haven't talked about the story at all. We've been talking about the themes and the characters and not tackling the actual plot of this movie. So yes, I just wasn't feeling it. The Godfather Part 2. I don't know what
as much good things as I've said about it, I feel similarly that it doesn't quite feel right in all departments to me. It's like while the flashbacks, Veto scenes are a hit for me, I feel like Michael's story is a bit of a miss.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's missing the hits. Okay, well, this is actually very interesting. All right, we're in a strange position here
Mm-hmm.
because unless I'm wrong on Abram's perspective, we're 2v2 right now.
I would put
this
part
is a
two at number
list.
one.
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
3
exactly.
on there now.
Same here.
Yeah.
It has 3 possible positions.
Why I say 2v2 is because it's either me and Abram won it at number 1.
Hmm.
And I don't know if either of you won it above Parasite.
Well, we should do a reveal.
Yeah, let's do it.
Shall we? Okay, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Should we start with above Parasite? Should we start with that to solidify number 2?
Okay.
See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Add some suspense. I like a little suspense.
Well,
Yeah,
but I don't like it more than Parasite. I would put this at 3rd, personally, but
Then-
because I didn't.
Well, then we should let's just go out with it. Does it go above Parasite? Raise your hand if it's above Parasite.
Wow! Holy
We did
shit!
it! We did
Look
it,
at
boys.
this. Wow!
I gotta say, when we put in Parasite into the equation, I enjoyed Parasite way more. Parasite is a much more enjoyable film for me than Godfather Part 2. Even though it's similar to Godfather Part 1, I think Godfather. I think it goes at.
Look at this smile. You boys
He's got
just
that
made
shit-eating
you
grin
made
right
my
now.
fucking day.
He's
All right.
beaming.
Look, I like all the movies we've watched so far, but last week was such a blow to me, having to put Parasite at number 2. And even though I prefer Part 2, I will take the loss of Part 2 beneath or at the bottom if it means Parasite can beat a Godfather movie.
So we must let our man Abram speak his mind.
Our esteemed colleague Abram.
Yes.
What did we do,
And
Abram?
Meter
What
from
did we
Background
do to
Banter.
your boy, Abram? What did we do to your boy, Godfather Part 2?
You massacred my boy. I don't
It's,
like that at all.
Wow.
That was
But here's
bad.
the thing. It was terrible. I've never done an impression before. I've never done it.
Really?
I can't get my voice raspy enough.
Yeah, Abram. You
massacred my boy.
I massacred my boy.
You massacred my boy.
But here's what I'll say. Because I wanted at number 1. I think this is one of the finest films I've ever seen in my entire life. And frankly, upon a rewatch, I can see us entering my top 10 films of all time.
Interesting.
I really feel like I've said my entire piece, and to not really spend time restating myself because we're already going a little bit long. If you want to hear what I have to say, just watch the video again, but watch it on a different account so we get 2 views.
Okay, and with that,
drum
roll, please.
Go.
We got to look at our graph. We got to look at our little list here to see.
I'm gonna calm down.
Okay, I updated the letterbox list, if that means anything.
All right. There it is.
Ooh, wow.
At number 3, following behind Godfather Part 1 and Parasite. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for.
I'm really hoping for Godfather Part 3.
I said this right before we went live. I was more excited for the spin than I was for the discussion of the movie. And here it is. I have been waiting for this. The moment I've been waiting for.
Okay.
I'm just hoping for a movie I haven't seen before.
Same.
I've got the spin wheel up. I'm clicking the button. It's going. What are we gonna get? I'm looking at it.
Oh dear God. Oh dear God.
It's going. We're holding us in suspense. We got
feel-
31.
Ooh.
31.
Okay. All right.
Let's see.
Ooh, okay. This is definitely a different one. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this. I have. But 31 is the 1988 Barry Levinson film starring Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman.
Rain
Rain
Man.
Man.
Woo!
Rain Man.
Rain Man.
Any experience?
No,
I've
I haven't seen it.
I've
not
seen
seen
it a long time ago.
Okay. All right. This is going to be great. I'm excited for this.
All right.
Well,
Wow.
it's still one that I haven't seen, but also I've definitely seen the most best pictures out of anyone here, so I think that's going to happen a lot.
Definitely gonna be a good movie. Definitely gonna be a good movie.
And
Don't mock people with mental disabilities.
I'm mocking Dustin Hoffman's portrayal of a person with disabilities.
Oh Lord.
We're doing an impression in every review from now on.
Uh-oh.
okay. So next week we'll be back on our quest for the best. Questist for the bestest with our review
Name.
of Rain Man.
Okay, I'm very excited for that.
We'll see you
Yeah.
then.
See
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye.
Play epic Francis Ford Coppola.